Do you struggle with self-doubt as you slurp and try to describe what you're tasting? We've all been there, and it's super frustrating, but here are 5 simple steps to train your palate and fall more deeply in love with coffee than you ever thought possible. Before we dive in, we have some big news. We've finally launched the product side of our business with this incredible line of drinkware. These cappuccino cups and saucers are custom designed and handmade in Pondicherry and are now available on our website. We are trying to figure out international shipping, but for now, it's India only. Oh, and one more thing. If you haven't already, then please hit that subscribe button. It makes a huge difference with the YouTube algorithm. Okay, back to palate training. Tasting and smelling are easy. Almost all of us are equipped with rather exquisite hardware, but the challenge lies in translating this abundance of raw data into something useful and understandable. It's like trying to speak a language you barely know. You know exactly what you want to say, but you don't have the words. This is precisely the case for most people who are trying to describe what they're eating. Most of us throw around superlatives like, damn, this pizza is amazing, but we can't quite say why. So this video aims to break down this rather monumental task into more palatable steps. Pun absolutely intended. Okay, for starters, let's get the basics down. Sweet, salt, sour, bitter, and umami or savory. Prepare dilute solutions and try identifying them blindfolded. During my SEA sensory training in London, we used these dilutions. Once you've got a handle on this, increase dilution. Then, to really up the challenge, mix 2 or more and test yourself. This should lay a solid foundation to build on. Moving on to smell. Olfaction plays a huge role in how we perceive taste. Inhale as you crush a peppermint leaf, tear a lemon rind, peel an overripe banana. Smell the soil, the grass, smell wood, ash, mildew on a damp cloth. Smell cloves, cinnamon, and even your pets too. Smell everything. And as you exhale, pay attention to the emotions that it evokes, how it makes you feel, and what memories it triggers, and store that away in your olfactory bank. For example, the smell of lemon takes me back to summer holidays as a child when my cousins used to bring us this sour candy called lemon drops. This takes time, so make it a daily ritual, and before you know it, you'll be making these associations without even having to think about it. Then, to level up your training, smell your food and try to pick out ingredients. Now, before we move on, here's a pro tip from wine master sommelier Tim Gazer. When you're trying to smell something, move it a little further away from your nose, then open your mouth slightly and inhale through both your nose and your mouth at the same time. This is called active inhalation and uses both ortho and retronasal smelling in tandem, effectively doubling your physiological real estate that is used to smell. Then, use short sniffs instead of deep breaths to prevent your nose from being overwhelmed. This technique works particularly well for people like me whose sense of smell is very sensitive. Awesome, so now that you know how to work on your taste and smell, combine the two and ta-da, you have flavor. A complex combination of gustation and olfaction is what allows our brain to perceive flavor. Eating and drinking more mindfully is key to conquering this step, but there is a little secret that can help speed things along. Pay attention to everything that you put in your mouth, but only focus on one attribute at a time. It's very easy to get overwhelmed with everything that's going on, so breaking it down really helps. For example, focus on only mouthfeel. Is it heavy or light, thin or viscous? Does it coat your tongue or dry it out? Similarly, sweetness, aftertaste, acidity, and aroma are a few of the other things that you could pay attention to or be mindful of. I promise you, this exercise alone will transform the way that you appreciate and enjoy food and drink. Okay, coming to the fun part, cupping coffee. For those of you who don't know what cupping is, it's a method used by coffee professionals to taste and evaluate coffee. There are several great resources on how to set up a cupping at home. So we've just linked to one of them, which is James Hoffman's video in the description below. Definitely check that out after you've watched this video. Cool, so here's what we suggest. Try coffees from various regions, processed differently, roasted to different levels. Know that the real education begins when you try more than one coffee at a time. Comparing and contrasting will give you a whole new appreciation for how diverse this drink can be. For example, if you have coffees from Ethiopia, Brazil, India, and say a Robusta from Vietnam on a cupping table, then you have some real contrast to work with. And contrast is key to getting the most out of this step. In fact, Tim Wendelbo even recommends that you throw in an instant coffee like Nescafe into the mix. Yes, you heard that right. Cheap instant coffee tastes awful, but it has that generic coffee taste that's common to pretty much every coffee. So cupping that before you try, say, an Ethiopian coffee will really highlight the differences and dial up those florals and fruitiness. It's amazing how easy it becomes to then pick out tasting notes. You should definitely give it a try if you haven't already. When it comes to tasting coffee, again, start with the basics. Before you go trying to pick out notes of key lime pie and peanut brittle, first focus on acidity or sourness, sweetness, bitterness, body, and aftertaste. While the entire tongue can perceive all the tastes, acidity is usually experienced on the sides of the tongue and makes you pucker and salivate. So pay attention to the tingling on the sides of your tongue and how much your mouth is watering to gauge how acidic a coffee is. Then see if you find it enjoyable or not. The word sour is used as a negative descriptor for acidity in coffee, and this usually means that it isn't balanced out by other attributes like sweetness or bitterness. For example, imagine biting into a lime versus a ripe orange. Both highly acidic, but one is a lot more balanced out with sweetness and therefore is a lot more enjoyable. Similarly, you can have a coffee with very high acidity that is either pleasant or unpleasant. Sweetness in coffee is very subtle. Green coffee has a lot of sugar, about 8%, but most of this is lost during the roasting process due to Maillard or browning reactions. In fact, experiments performed at UC Davis show that the concentration of sweet active molecules sucrose, fructose, and glucose in roasted coffee are well below the human sensory detection threshold. This research is ongoing, but so far it looks like the sweetness we perceive in the cup comes from sweet aromas that are present in the coffee. So don't go looking for obvious or sugary sweetness. Cup contrasting coffees and you'll be able to identify sweetness in one relative to the other, and this makes it a lot easier. Bitterness is the most complex of all tastes and yet is rarely spoken about in specialty coffee. All coffees have some degree of bitterness and it plays a key role in balancing out the cup. We love dark chocolate, hoppy beer, and even bottle bitters and put them in our cocktails. So clearly it's desirable based on the nature of the bitterness, the quantity, and the context in which it's presented. So pay closer attention and you'll notice that some brews are delightfully bitter while others not so much. Another interesting fact is that it's very common to confuse bitter and sour, especially if your palate isn't trained. A good way to differentiate between the two is to focus on where the sensation is on the tongue, as bitterness is usually experienced more at the back. And also, if it isn't making you pucker and salivate, then it's more likely to be bitterness. Body, texture, or mouthfeel is another really important aspect of coffee tasting. It's basically how the coffee feels on your tongue. Some coffees can be light and almost tea-like, whereas others can be heavy and creamy. A great way to practice this is to taste water, skim milk, and whole milk one after the other and notice just how different each one feels on your tongue and in your mouth. Then take this knowledge and apply it to tasting coffees and see if you can spot textural differences from one to the other. Lastly, we have aftertaste, and as the name suggests, it's what lingers in your mouth after you've swallowed. Really good coffee can stay in your mouth for ages and lesser ones quickly vanish. Aftertaste can also be unpleasant, so pay attention to both the intensity and the quality. Once you've wrapped your head around these, you can put all the training we've spoken about so far into practice and start picking out things like under and over extraction. If your coffee tastes weak and sour, then it's probably under extracted. And on the other hand, if it's bitter and astringent, then it's likely over extracted. You can also try picking out broader categories of tasting notes like floral, fruity, nutty, and chocolatey, to name a few. At this point, your palate is already refined enough to enjoy not just coffee, but anything you eat or drink on a whole new level. For those of you wanting to take it a little bit further, just keep at it, and before you know it, you'll be picking out notes of blueberry, jackfruit, and baker's chocolate. Lastly, let's talk about speaking the language. While you practice these exercises, you'll want to describe what you're experiencing, either to document or share with someone else. While there is no right or wrong way to do this, as an industry, we use certain words to help us communicate more effectively with each other. Words like acidity, clarity, brightness, under and over extracted, mouthfeel, or finish, to name a few. Getting familiar with these terms can help you communicate your gustatory experience better with fellow coffee nerds. We may consider doing an entire video breaking down the most commonly used words in coffee if enough of you request it, so let us know in the comments below if that's something that you'd be interested in. Take all of this and incorporate it into your day-to-day, and it'll soon become second nature. You'll be sharpening your skills and improving every day. Practice with a friend or partner and challenge each other to make this even more fun. Just try not to sound too pretentious the next time you take a sip of coffee and you're like, ooh, this washed Ethiopian is intensely floral with bright acidity and has a delicate tea-like body. Well, that's a wrap on this one, and now we'd like to hear from you. Did you find this helpful? What techniques do you use to train your palate? And do you have any questions? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and brew aram se.